The first splash of wine hit Elias before anyone even registered the sound of the glass leaving the executive's hand. The second splash, the one that made a few people gasp and others grin, streaked down his cheek like a crimson accusation. By the third heartbeat, the room erupted into laughter so sharp and metallic it could have cut through bone. Elias didn't move, didn't react, didn't lift a hand to defend himself. He stood there quietly, letting the humiliation drip from him onto the polished marble floor. And in that silent, motionless moment, the entire hierarchy of the room declared itself. Before we go deeper, I hope you'll subscribe. I poured my heart into this story for you. Titan Tech's celebration was already loud, drunk, and self-congratulatory before Elias ever stepped into the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers dripped gold across a space filled with executives wearing designer suits so expensive they practically came with bragging rights. Every table was dressed in white silk, every centerpiece a frozen sculpture glowing blue from hidden lights. Music thumped through the walls, a curated playlist of "We're Winning" anthems that paired perfectly with the rising tide of arrogance swirling in the air. Elias entered quietly, unnoticed at first. He wore a clean but modest charcoal suit, one that didn't try to speak for him. His posture was straight, almost meditative, like someone who rarely needed to raise his voice to be heard. He walked with the steady calm of a man used to observing, thinking, absorbing, a man who saw more in a room than the room ever saw in him. Tonight he had come to see Titan Tech's leadership in their most natural state, without filters, without forced politeness, without knowing who he really was. Just men with money, power, and the belief that the world should bow at their feet. He made it only 10 steps into the ballroom before one executive spotted him, a broad-shouldered man with a grin too sharp to be friendly. His name was Rylan Pierce, Titan Tech's chief operations officer, a man who frequently confused cruelty with charisma. Ryland's eyes dragged across Elias' modest suit, his smirk widened. "Well, look at this," he said loud enough for his circle to turn. "Did someone's intern wander in here?" The executives laughed, a burst of shallow, synchronized amusement. Elias simply offered a polite nod, the kind that neither confirmed nor denied anything. But his silence offended them more than anything he could have said. Another executive, thin, angular, with a voice like someone perpetually unimpressed, clicked his tongue. "That's not an intern. That's staff. Look at the suit. Thread count under 100 if I had to guess." 100, someone snorted. "Try 50. More laughter. Elias didn't shift his expression. His eyes remained soft, calm, almost curious. So this is who they are when they think no one is watching. He scanned their faces, not in judgment but in study, every gesture, every sneer, every casual assumption. He had seen their financials, strong, ambitious, risky in a way that could build empires or burn them. But numbers didn't reveal character, and character determined everything. Rylan lifted his glass, a deep red, vintage imported exclusively for this event. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, not bothering to hide his disdain. "This is a private corporate celebration. Staff entrance is in the back." Elias held his voice steady. "I was invited." It was the truth, but truth meant nothing to men who assumed they were superior by default. Ryland stepped closer, the scent of expensive cologne and liquor rolling off him. "Who invited you?" he challenged. "The janitorial board." A few nearby executives laughed so hard one actually doubled over. Elias didn't snap, didn't bristle, didn't give them the emotional reaction they were hunting for. He only lifted his eyes and said, "Someone who believes in evaluating people by more than appearances." A strange sentence, one that landed with confusion instead of quick understanding. It wasn't snark, it wasn't resistance, just a quiet truth. But cruelty rarely recognizes truth. Ryland stared at him, a slow grin spreading. He swirled his wine, the surface shimmering under the lights. "Well," he said, From where I'm standing, your appearance tells me everything." Before anyone processed what he was about to do, Rylan tipped the glass. The wine cascaded over Elias' head in a red waterfall. A chorus of gasps, snickers, and delighted cruelty filled the room. The thin executive clapped mockingly. Another executive pointed at Elias' dripping suit. Someone pulled out their phone, recording with undisguised glee. "People like you," Ryland said, "don't belong in events like this." "Go mop a floor or something," another added. A few voices chimed in. "Wrong room, buddy. Security, we've got a stray. Get him out before he stains the carpet." Elias wiped his face slowly with a napkin from the bar. No anger in his movements, no shame, just a calm, deliberate stillness. Security arrived quickly, rushing toward him, unsure of the situation but obeying the authoritative gestures from Titan Tech's leaders. "This man bothering you?" one guard asked Rylan. "Yeah," Rylan said, voice dripping arrogance. "Get him out." "Sir," the guard said to Elias, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Elias nodded once. "Of course." He walked out quietly, leaving behind a trail of dripping wine and loud, echoing laughter. Not a single executive stopped him. Not one felt regret. Not one wondered if they had just made a catastrophic mistake. But they had. A mistake worth $500 million. Outside the ballroom, the hallway was quiet. Just soft lighting, distant music, and the muted hum of an air conditioner pushing cold air through the vents. Elias stopped, closed his eyes. The wine clung to his suit, cold and sticky. The scent of crushed grapes filled his nose. That was who they are, he thought, not who they pretend to be. There was no anger in the thought, just clarity. Elias had grown up watching people twist into different shapes depending on who they believed they were talking to. Show them power, and they bowed. Hide your power, and they revealed their true nature. He preferred the truth, even when it was ugly. He straightened his jacket, ignoring the dark stain across his shoulder. He didn't need revenge. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to return to the ballroom and announce who he was. That wasn't his style. Elias Ward believed in something more powerful than anger. He believed in consequences. And tonight had given him everything he needed. The next morning, the sky over Ward Global Headquarters glowed a pale, calm blue. Sunlight struck the building's mirrored surface, turning it into a towering shard of glass reaching into the sky. Inside, the atmosphere was entirely different from Titan Tech's loud, chaotic celebration. Quiet, professional, disciplined. The air carried the muted rustle of papers, the soft clicking of keyboards, the occasional low hum of conversation, nothing more. Ward Global didn't need noise to prove its power. When Titan Tech's executives entered the lobby, they walked with swagger sharp enough to scratch the marble floors. Their suits were pristine, their expressions smug, their confidence unshakable. Investment analysts had already projected what the deal would mean. News outlets had teased it. Blogs were speculating. Even stock chatter forums were buzzing. To the world, Titan Tech had already won. Rylan and his team strutted toward the elevators, greeting the receptionist with dismissive nods. One of them, the thin executive, smirked at her name tag and whispered to Rylan, "Cute. They label them so we don't forget which ones are replaceable." They all laughed. The receptionist forced a smile, her eyes flicking toward the boardroom floor number they requested. She knew what was happening today. Everyone in the building knew. It was the biggest deal of the quarter, maybe the year. But she also knew something they didn't. Because everyone at Ward Global knew exactly who Elias Ward was. And none of them forgot it. While Titan Tech rode the elevator upward, Elias stood in a quiet office 2 floors above the executive boardroom. He had changed into a clean suit, a deep navy tailored to his frame with understated elegance, not flashy, not showy, just right. He looked into the mirror. His eyes were calm, centered, untouched by last night's indignities. Let people show you who they are, he reminded himself. Believe them the first time. On his desk lay the printed contract, $500 million worth of projected partnerships, shared patents, mutual market expansion. Good numbers, strong angles, financially promising. But poisoned. And he couldn't build Ward Global's future on poison. He closed the contract folder gently, almost ceremonially. As he stepped toward the door, the faint scent of last night's wine, no longer present, yet strangely lingering in memory, followed him like a whisper. Titantech entered the boardroom with wide shoulders and wider smiles. But the board members greeting them weren't smiling back. Ward Global's directors, each one seasoned, disciplined, sharpened by experience, watched the executives enter with unreadable expressions. Rylan whispered to his CFO. They looked tense, probably nervous to seal the deal. But the CFO wasn't listening. He was staring at the table, specifically at the empty seat at the head. "Is the CEO here?" he asked quietly. Before Rylan could answer, before anyone could question the atmosphere, the boardroom door opened again. And Elias walked in. Clean suit, composed, present, eyes sharper than glass. The transformation from the man in the cheap suit they humiliated to the man who owned everything around them was instantaneous and devastating. The executives froze, mouths slightly open, eyes widening with the slow, dawning horror that only comes when a person realizes they have destroyed themselves without meaning to. Elias didn't even glance at their shock. The board members rose in respect the moment he stepped inside. He walked to the head of the table with calm inevitability. He sat, and only then did he look at the men who had poured wine on him and mocked him. "Good morning," he said softly. "I believe we met last night." Their faces drained of all color. Elias placed the unsigned contract on the table, tapping it once with a single finger. "You showed me your true character," he said, "and I do not invest in men who lead through arrogance, cruelty, or disrespect." Silence fell so thick it seemed to swallow the oxygen. The $500 million deal, once a guaranteed victory, evaporated. One executive tried to speak. Another reached for an explanation. Rylan's jaw moved without sound. Elias didn't need to raise his voice. He only slid the contract folder closed. It was over. And they knew it. They felt it. They deserved it. But this was only the beginning. The humiliation they had inflicted was nothing compared to the avalanche that was about to hit them. Their fall would echo. Their downfall would spread. Their reputation tarnished, their markets shaken, their leadership questioned. And Elias, he would walk through the storm they created with the same quiet composure he always had. Justice wasn't loud. It was inevitable. If you were standing beside them at this moment, what would you have done? The wine on Elias' suit from the night before had faded from memory for most, but the sting lingered in their minds. Rylan Pierce, sitting across from him in the glass and steel boardroom, could barely meet his gaze. Every attempted smirk faltered. Every practiced arrogance crumbled under the calm authority emanating from the man they had humiliated. Titantech's executives had entered the boardroom expecting victory. They had rehearsed their talking points, polished their smiles, and ensured their voices carried dominance. They had come to collect accolades, investment signatures, and headlines. Instead, they faced silence, the heaviest weapon Elias had ever wielded. This is what arrogance looks like when stripped bare, Elias thought quietly. This is the truth of people when they believe the world is theirs. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and subtle cologne. The sun streamed in through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the high-gloss table like a spotlight trained on them. Every chair around the table seemed too small for their inflated egos, every crystal glass too delicate for their clumsy pride. Ryland tried again, voice slightly shaky. We came to discuss the contract. Elias nodded almost imperceptibly. Yes, he said, voice calm, even deliberate. About the contract. There was no heat in it. No accusation. Just the quiet certainty of someone who knew the truth and was waiting for them to realize it themselves. You don't get second chances with me, Elias' mind whispered. Not after last night. The thin executive cleared his throat, attempting humor. I mean, sir, we were just. Elias' eyes narrowed fractionally. The man's polite stammering collapsed beneath the weight of his gaze. Silence returned. The executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. They had spent years building personas, wearing the masks of power and charm. And here, stripped of their armor, they were children standing before a judge. Ryland, desperate to regain control, leaned forward, placing his hands on the polished table. We're serious professionals, he said, voice rising just slightly. We know how to close deals. You can't deny that this is an incredible opportunity for both our companies. Elias picked up the contract folder. He ran a finger along the edge of the stack of papers. His movements were casual, almost bored, but deliberate enough that everyone in the room felt the weight of his intention. I don't deny the financial potential, Elias said softly, but I cannot and will not do business with men who define themselves by cruelty and arrogance. Ryland's face twitched. We were joking. Joking? Elias repeated, a faint lift of his brow emphasizing the absurdity. The whine, the mockery, the assumption that your wealth gave you the right to humiliate another human being. You call that a joke? The room was silent. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to pause. The truth hurts more than any insult, Elias thought, and now it will. The executives tried to recover. They began to offer excuses, rationalizations. It was a misunderstanding. We didn't know he was important. He wore a cheap suit. It was a joke. Elias' calm didn't waver. He tapped the closed contract folder. Your misunderstanding cost you everything. This deal gone. Not because of finances, not because of strategy, but because of who you truly are. A ripple of shock spread across the room. Some executives' faces flushed crimson. Others paled. The realization that money and power had blinded them to character, and that character had just cost them $500 million settled in their bones. Outside the boardroom, whispers began to stir. Even before the meeting concluded, word reached the press office. A high-profile deal had abruptly stalled. Emails went flying. Rumors spread. Analysts whispered about TitanTech's sudden reversal. Some employees of TitanTech began messaging each other privately, worried that the deal, once a guarantee, might collapse entirely. Is it true? Did Ward Global actually walk away? Social media, always hungry for drama, started buzzing. One viral post labeled TitanTech executives as the billionaires who humiliated a man and lost. Another quietly highlighted the irony. Man in cheap suit who got wine poured on him owns the company. The humiliation was no longer private, it was public. And Elias, as ever, watched quietly. Ryland, desperate now, tried one final maneuver. He opened his laptop, attempting to pull up spreadsheets, figures, charts, proof that their numbers, their strategy, their genius would convince Elias to reconsider. Elias didn't glance at the laptop. He stood, walked slowly toward the window. Outside, the city spread in silver-blue calm, indifferent to human drama, yet reflecting it perfectly in its mirrored towers. He turned, looking directly at Ryland. Your numbers are impressive, he said, voice low. But intelligence is meaningless without integrity. Leadership is meaningless without respect. And investment is meaningless without trust. Ryland's knuckles whitened around the laptop. He opened his mouth to argue but could not form words. For the first time in his career, he understood that power could be meaningless, that wealth, when paired with arrogance, was fragile, and that consequences were quiet, slow and unstoppable like water wearing down stone. This is why I observe, Elias thought. This is why I hide in plain sight. The executives left Ward Global's headquarters that day with more than failed signatures. They carried embarrassment, rumors, and the dawning terror that their public image could crumble with one whispered story. The thin executive avoided eye contact with colleagues, muttering under his breath. Ryland's normally broad grin was gone, replaced with a twitching grimace of panic. Even minor investors called, confused by sudden internal shifts. Elias, meanwhile, retreated to his private study. He poured a glass of water, sat in a chair, and allowed himself a moment to reflect. They revealed themselves fully. They set the stage perfectly for the consequences they never saw coming. The wine wasn't just wine. The humiliation wasn't just humiliation. It was a test, a mirror, and every reflection of greed, arrogance, and cruelty would now play out under his control. The subtle planning that began that night was invisible to Titan Tech. No diagrams on paper, no whispered secrets in corridors, just quiet, meticulous observation and deliberate timing. Elias began documenting every interaction, every slight, every microexpression. He reviewed public filings, investor notes, and press releases. He noted Titan Tech's vulnerabilities, their inflated egos, internal conflicts, overconfidence, and public perception. Every small misstep was cataloged, every overreach noted. It was a blueprint not for destruction, for justice, and justice, like a well-oiled machine, required patience. Meanwhile, Titan Tech tried to push forward. Meetings were scheduled, revised proposals circulated, confident emails sent. But the ripple effects of the previous night's humiliation had grown faster than they realized. A leaked clip of the wine incident circulated online, short, unremarkable footage, yet devastating in implication. Board members at other firms began questioning their ethics. Employees whispered. Investors reconsidered. The narrative of Titan Tech, once one of unstoppable ambition, shifted into caution and skepticism. Everything has consequences, Elias reminded himself quietly, and they chose their path willingly. Rylan, in private, sat in his office staring at the ceiling. The laughter of last night haunted him more than any newspaper headline. He tried to rationalize, to plan a comeback, but every strategy he drew up felt hollow. He was unaccustomed to being powerless, unaccustomed to being wrong, unaccustomed to being outmatched not by money, but by insight and quiet authority. Even his closest allies began to question him. Maybe we underestimated him, one murmured. Another avoided confrontation entirely. For the first time, Rylan understood. Power isn't just numbers, it isn't just deals, it isn't just titles. It is perception, it is integrity, it is knowing what is unseen and respecting it. Elias had them all in his grasp, without ever raising his voice. The day ended with Titan Tech executives leaving Ward Global with empty hands. Their expressions were masks of composure, but inside, the realization sank. They had lost, and they didn't even know how fully. Outside, the city lights shimmered in the river below, indifferent, eternal. But the reflection in the glass towers told a story of quiet power, a story written not in arrogance, but in patience and observation. And Elias, he returned to his office, removed his tie, and finally allowed himself a small exhale. This was only the beginning, he thought, but the first lesson has been delivered. The water of calm had turned into a rising tide, one that would wash over Titan Tech slowly, methodically, and completely. The morning air outside Titan Tech headquarters felt heavier than usual. A subtle tension buzzed through the building, invisible but palpable. Inside, Rylan Pierce and his team arrived early, hopping to control the narrative, patch the damage, and salvage the deal. But the universe and Elias had other plans. Emails flooded the executives' inboxes before the first coffee had even cooled. Regarding the Ward Global contract, read one subject line, another, urgent, compliance concerns. Each message carefully detailed Titan Tech's ethical lapses, referencing public footage, internal complaints, and confidential investor concerns. Attached were reports of investor inquiries, legal advisors raising red flags, and analysts predicting a stock impact if their arrogance persisted. Every click of the mouse was a reminder. The world was no longer under their control. The power they had wielded the night before was now a fragile veneer. Elias had orchestrated it quietly, subtly, a domino effect of consequences. Every action, every slight, every public humiliation had been catalogued and leveraged. They didn't just humiliate me, he thought. They humiliated themselves. Inside the Ward Global boardroom, Elias sat behind the same polished table that had once symbolized their shame. The sunlight glinted off the surface, casting long shadows across the faces of visiting executives. Elias looked calm, immaculate, unwavering. "Good morning," he said, voice soft but firm. "Let's discuss the future of partnerships, of leadership, and of respect." Ryland's jaw tightened. We thought the deal was still viable." Elias leaned forward, his eyes, sharp as obsidian, cut through every feigned bravado. "I gave you an opportunity to demonstrate character," he said. "You failed. You proved exactly what I observed last night. And now your credibility is in question across multiple boards, publicly and privately." The executives shifted uncomfortably. Every confident posture faltered under his gaze. They had been cocky yesterday, complacent today, and by the end of this hour broken. Word of Elias' decision had leaked subtly to the media, not by him, but by the ripple effect of corporate scrutiny. By midday, headlines appeared. Titan Tech's $500 million deal collapses amid ethics concerns. CEO's arrogance costs company. Ward Global walks away. Man in cheap suit owns $500 million investment. The irony stung like acid. Board members who had laughed at Elias the night before now found themselves scrutinized, doubted, and questioned. Investors canceled calls. Analysts downgraded projections. The market moved subtly but decisively. And Rylan, he stared at the phone in his hand as if it were a live grenade. Every notification, every ping, confirmed the narrative he had ignored. Arrogance had consequences. "I should have listened," he thought, "but it was too late. It's already too late." Elias didn't raise his voice. He didn't yell. He let the weight of the situation speak for itself. He asked the board of Titan Tech a simple question. "Do you believe a company led by men who humiliate and demean can truly be trusted to uphold partnerships, financial responsibilities, or public confidence?" The room, once loud and confident, fell silent. Rylan opened his mouth, then closed it. The thin executive muttered something inaudible. Every one of them knew the answer, but none wanted to admit it aloud. The contract folder remained closed. The $500 million deal was dead, and it was Elias' quiet authority that ensured it. But the fallout didn't stop at one meeting. Elias's influence extended quietly yet fully, cascading through networks of investors, journalists, and board members. Emails shared confidential observations of Titan Tech's leadership. Analysts highlighted missteps, arrogance, and poor ethics in reports to clients. Within days, Titan Tech faced internal pressure. Shareholders questioned judgment, employees whispered about leadership credibility, and external partners reconsidered alliances. Every action Rylan had taken, from the wine humiliation to arrogant assumptions, amplified the consequences. It was slow, methodical, devastating. "This is the law of cause and effect," Elias reflected, "and it requires no anger, only patience." Rylan tried to respond, to spin the narrative. He called meetings, issued statements, attempted to salvage relationships, but Elias' presence, quiet, unwavering, shadowed every attempt he had observed. He had waited, and he had all the leverage he needed. By midweek, Titan Tech's board was in disarray. Internal reviews questioned leadership decisions. Employees began quietly leaving, seeking stability elsewhere. The public perception, once in their favor, had flipped entirely. All because a man they had humiliated had refused to respond with anger, only with calm, measured consequence. The climactic confrontation arrived one Friday morning. Elias requested a final private meeting with Titan Tech's senior leadership. The conference room was cold, stark, modern, no distractions. Outside, the city hummed indifferently, yet the weight inside that room was immense. Rylan and the thin executive arrived, tense, faces pale. Elias remained seated at the head of the table, motionless, eyes unwavering. "I've reviewed your internal communications," Elias began. "Your approach to leadership, strategy, and interpersonal respect is inadequate." Ryland's hands trembled. We can fix this, just." Elias lifted a single hand. "No, you cannot. Integrity cannot be retrofitted. Respect cannot be feigned after the fact. And credibility, once shattered, is irreparable in the eyes of investors, employees, and the public." He placed the contract folder in front of them. "Everything you wanted, everything you thought you earned through arrogance, is gone. Consider this your final opportunity to reflect on why the world responds to character, not titles." For the first time, Ryland spoke without pretense. We underestimated you." Elias did not smile, he simply nodded, not underestimated, observed. "And you revealed yourselves fully. Your actions brought you here, not me." The executives realized. Their humiliation had never been just about wine or a cheap suit. It had been the mirror of their own arrogance. And mirrors never lie. By the end of that day, Titan Tech's leadership had changed. Not through firing, not through force, but through the quiet inevitability of consequences. Stock reports reflected caution. Investors pulled back. The public record questioned ethics and judgment. Elias, meanwhile, returned to his office. He removed his watch, set it beside his notebook, and looked out over the city. Justice doesn't need celebration, he thought. It needs patience, observation, and timing. The sun reflected on the mirrored towers, a subtle reminder that while human arrogance may rise, humility and insight remain eternal. In the weeks that followed, Titan Tech's downfall rippled. Ryland resigned, publicly citing personal growth and reflection. Other executives quietly left, unable to sustain the scrutiny or the weight of public perception. Ward Global, under Elias' discreet yet decisive leadership, continued its growth, steady, ethical, and measured. And Elias, he returned to anonymity, observing quietly from the shadows. The man in the cheap suit, once humiliated, had quietly rewritten the rules, not with shouting, not with spectacle, but with patient, inevitable justice. The wine had been a spark, the arrogance of Titan Tech a kindling, and Elias' calm authority the slow, unstoppable blaze. Weeks later, Ryland sat alone in a modest apartment, scrolling through news feeds. Every headline reminded him. $500 million lost, credibility questioned, public humiliation recorded forever. He thought of Elias, that man, he whispered. He didn't even try to hurt us. He just waited. And that was worse than any punishment he could have imagined. Because Elias had shown him the true meaning of power, not wealth, not aggression, not titles. Power is patience, power is observation, power is justice. Elias returned to his office that evening. He poured a glass of water, placed it on the desk beside the closed contract folder, and allowed himself a small, rare smile. The city outside glittered in golden light, but he saw only the reflections of lessons learned, arrogance humbled, and justice served. He ran a finger along the contract folder one last time. The wine-stained humiliation, the arrogance, the ego, all a distant memory now, preserved only in his quiet satisfaction. And he whispered softly, as if speaking to the universe itself, "Respect is earned, not assumed, never stolen and never taken for granted." The city didn't answer, but somewhere in the corridors of power, A lesson had been etched in permanence. The man you humiliate today could own your tomorrow. Now I want to hear from you. What's the real moral of this story?